Thanks for joining us for this third segment as we continue to look at Field Audit Trail. I'm joined by Jonathan Bruce, who's now going to walk us through a demonstration of the Field Audit Trail product. And it looks like you've pulled up an org here for a finance organization. Now, that's an example that we talked about a few times in the earlier segments. Why don't you take us through the types of information that they're going to want to include in their Field Audit Trail?
Sure. So, like you said in our prior example, we talked about a fictitious bank that might be dealing with their customers and using the case object to maintain their interactions with their customers, and they're in a situation whereby they need to be able to maintain their field audit history for case objects for up to 10 years. However, this bank does a lot of loan origination, so for their loan origination object, they have a field history retention requirement for 7 years. So remembering, as a Salesforce admin, who I'm going to pretend to be now, I've talked to my business, the bank, and I now have a whole new set of criteria as to how I should manage my field history.
So now you're going to go in and set up Field Audit Trail. So show us how easy this is to do.
Great. So once again, we go to setup. I'm going to drill into the case object specifically. And remember, with Field Audit Trail, we get 60 more fields we can track.
Right.
So we look at case, for example, and we say, oh, hang on, I've got all these more fields I can track. I now can have a really good sense of what fields I cannot track and what I cannot. What I'm going to do here, because we have higher limits here, we're going to track all fields for the case object. So that's great. So and I know I've met the first requirement of my business. So the next requirement of my business is I got to now set my policies. So what are my policies for the retention of the field history that I'm generating here?
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is pivot to a different application, because as we talked about earlier on, we specified the policies using a text editor. So let's quickly walk through what this is here.
Now, these are the policies that you're setting up for this object for the retention of the information and then also for the removal of that information later.
You've got the case object and the loan object. The case object that we just saw, the retention requirements are for 10 years. So after 10 years, we don't want to see that information anymore. We want that information to be gone. That's that contract here. Notice I also have a 3-month figure here. What that tells you is exactly when this data gets archived.
Got it.
And just for quickly, let's look at the loan origination object here. Notice we have a retention here for 7 years.
Got it.
Okay, so how do we actually now go enforce that? What we would do here is we would go to Workbench.
Okay, now what is Workbench?
So Workbench is a tool that we have supplied free to our customers. It gives us a UI experience on top of our app, and we're interacting with our APIs.
Okay.
So when you hear about API first, you don't need to be scared that you have to write API constructs yourselves. You actually have a tool to help you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to deploy that policy here. So it's called the compliance retention policy. Notice I have a couple of objects here: loan origination, case account. There's a couple of other objects I've defined a policy for. Each of these objects has a separate policy that I've defined.
So now you're uploading the information that you just created in the text editor with the policy information.
That's right. And so I can deploy it up here. It's going to go into this org. You press go here, and once it hits the org, you'll see this churning for a second, and then success. So we've now applied that policy. Here now we have a situation where now we know for a fact, and there's a contract in place, that our field history for case and for loan origination will be maintained for up to 10 and to 7 years, respectively.
Let's say that we have an audit event. How do we ask the question?
So when we deploy that field history retention policy, what actually happens is we move these records into the field history archive object. Now notice this object is just like any other object you would have on platform. But this object is a special kind of object. It's backed by our big data infrastructure. So all your field history goes into this, and it's geared for billions and billions of records. That's what it does well. And I can start asking questions. Like you said, we have an event whereby I am trying to understand my field audit trail across a whole set of field history types. And what I can then do is run a SQL query very simply here. Let's expand the reach here. Let's run a query that returns to us the last 300 records that were archived. We run a very simple query here. It's going to run that query. And now look what I can see here. I can see all the new value for my old opportunities that I have here. And as I dig deeper in this, if I'm in an audit event, I now have the guarantee that this is retained for long-term evaluation.
do we have the ability to export this information and put it into an analytics tool, for example?
Absolutely. So it's API accessible, which also means it's bulk API accessible. So if you have your own exploration tool like Splunk or Excel or something like that, you can easily pull this data out and slice dice it in any way you would have. But I thought it would be interesting to use our own tool to do this.
That sounds great.
Now, what this analytics, Salesforce Analytics perspective gives you is a sense of your operational health with regards to your field audit data. So we slice this across 3 different contexts. Number 1, what's the org-wide view? Number 2, your object-wide view, and number 3, your field overview. So you yourself, Kane, if you're the business owner, you asked me, okay, have you done what I asked you to do? I could show you this. Right, we now know that we are retaining all the field history data for the specific objects that you told me to. We can get a perspective of what fields we're tracking, and we also know who actually created those policies, so you know the right people is creating those policies moving forward. Also, we have an idea as to what the retention policies are, and we can look at this graph here, so we can get a success metric that, wow, we're actually retaining these records, it's working like we wanted it to. And then, of course, just as a quick example, we can kind of get a quick perspective of what were the last records that were archived, and that gives us that perspective here. So again, this gives us a really nice perspective as to our operational health, because the business is putting trust in Field Audit Trail to maintain an audit trail for you. This gives you that assurance that it's happening.
Wow. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I think, for a lot of audience members, it's just great to see how easy it is to set up Field Audit Trail, and then how when you have an audit event, how easy it is to ask a question, and how you can even surface that data in an analytics tool like Salesforce Analytics. So incredibly helpful. And thank you for answering all of our questions today about Field Audit Trail. If you have further questions about Field Audit Trail, be sure to talk to your account executive.